What's going on, ladies, gents, and kids of all ages? It is Eric coming back at you once again from the Nerd Cave, and today we have another very exciting deck tech for you. We're going to be talking about Amethyst Steel. Speci first brought this set 6 version of this deck list to the forefront in a recent Europe versus North America, mostly like YouTube personalities, people who have been highly ranked in the game, got voted on, and kind of got an invitation to this Pixelborn Connect tournament. So it's kind of neat to watch, see some decks become very relevant. We saw a version of Amber Sapphire that did quite well, which, as you guys know, I've been on Amber Sapphire since set 5 and definitely been something that I've been championing, and it's great to see the deck list look better than ever in set 6. They did some stuff differently than I had done with my deck list, and I've since tweaked my deck list, and it's kind of a hybrid of what I came up with and what they're doing, and I think the deck works really incredibly well. Amber Sapphire is really good now. But I think the Amethyst Steel deck list is cool. I changed it a little bit, tweaked it to fit my playstyle a little bit more, mainly changing counts on a couple cards and adding one card that Speci wasn't playing. That being said, as always, big shout out to the Patreon. Thank you for making giveaways on the channel possible and always supporting the channel, and thank you to the people who take the time to tune in, click that subscribe button. Without any further ado, let's go ahead and jump into today's deck list. So the first card we're going to be playing, I think an absolute Amethyst staple now, this card is incredibly good, is the new Amethyst Diablo, a 1-cost inkable character, 0/1 stat line questing for 1. But when it's banished, you draw a card. Doesn't matter if it's banished in a challenge, just when it's banished, which is inevitably going to happen to this, and you're going to get to draw a card. It's potentially going to gain you a lore pip or eat up some removal. Either way, it ends up being kind of a 2-for-1. Next up, we are on 4 Maleficent. Obviously, this is your way to get some early game questing in. Very, very good into the Sapphire matchup, or if you have something to potentially protect it going into that second turn, which this deck does kind of play, even though it doesn't have bodyguards. She is a 1-cost, uninkable character, 1/1 stat line questing for 2, so great to just come down and be an aggressive lore threat right at the beginning of the game. Next up, also in the 1-drop slot, we are on 4 Chernobog's Followers, a 1-cost inkable character, 2/1 stat line questing for 1, and whenever this character quests, you may banish them to draw a card. I think Chernobog's Followers is fantastic, great way to keep up with that card draw and just keep pushing out threats. This deck isn't necessarily super focused on your cards getting to quest a bunch of times or staying on the board. It's focused on letting you continue to draw cards and play new threats that are not exerted. Last 1-drop character, we are on 4 Magic Brooms, a 1-cost inkable 1/2 character questing for 1, and whenever you play another character, you may banish this character to draw a card. So again, when it's banished, draw a card type ability. Maleficent is really your only option questing for 2. Everything else is more focused on trying to get you some early game card draw. A great way to protect some of those characters for the first couple turns, especially if you're coming in aggressive with a Maleficent, is going to be Befuddle, a 1-cost action that returns chosen character or item to its player's hand. Obviously not great against any of the items that are current in the meta, but it is a great way on that turn 2 to develop another threat and potentially bounce back whatever your opponent's threatening you with turn 1, so you continue to get some early game questing in. Or alternatively, if it's a little further in and you hit a Maleficent, you want to keep her protected for that additional turn, you can Befuddle your own Maleficent or anything 2-drop or less back to your hand to get it readied again and play it again onto the field. So always keep in mind you can Befuddle your own character. Last up in the 1-drop slot, we have another action. It is 4 Fire the Cannons, a 1-cost uninkable action. It's just going to deal 2 damage to chosen character. Obviously, it's not great against stuff like Daisy, but when you're looking at like Lilos or Maleficents, you're in one of those aggro matchups, your opponent's trying to come at you hot with a Diablo. Fire the Cannons can be really good to deal with some of those threats. Also in the Steel Song matchup, it deals with Cinderella, so it is going to deal with some of those early game characters. Against Ruby Amethyst, they've been getting kind of greedy playing stuff like Chernobog's Followers as opposed to Olaf, so you can punish that with Fire the Cannons and just continue to keep the pressure on right at the beginning of the game. We actually reduced this list from 17 uninkables to 16. I think 16 is a little more comfortable spot. I think you could make 17 work with how low the curve is on the deck, but I like 16 a little bit better. Jumping over to the 2-drop slot, we are on 4 Mr. Smee Bumbling Mate. Still, in my opinion, one of the best cards in the game. A 2-cost inkable character, 3/3 stat line questing for 2, and at the end of your turn, if you don't have a captain character in play, it is going to take 1 damage. So in this deck, that is typically going to be happening. You don't have a captain character to put into play with it. I think Gantu might be a captain, but he's coming in way later, so he's not typically going to be super relevant to Smee. But he's just going to be questing for 2, gaining you some solid lore. And if you have a way to get him readied back up or bounce him back to your hand, obviously you can get rid of that damage that is on him. a great card draw option, a card I've been hot on since it came out. Honestly, I wish I grabbed foils these sooner because they've gotten a little crazy now. They used to be pretty cheap before everybody got turned onto it, but I was just trying to complete the set at that time. But we are on 3 Doc Bold Knight, a 2-cost uninkable character, 1/3 stat line, questing for 1. And when you play this character, you may discard your hand to draw 2 cards. Obviously, in this game, you don't actually have to have a hand to hit those triggers. So typically, you want to play him when he is the last card in your hand and just get 2 free cards for 2 ink while developing a 1/3 character. Great way to keep the pressure on. Last up in the 2-drop slot, we're on 2 Calhoun, probably one of the best new characters from the new set. A 2-cost uninkable character, 3/2 stat line, which is super solid for a 2-cost, questing for 1. So meager quest, but that's not what makes her cool. What makes her cool is resist +1. So super good, makes her almost work like a 3/3, but they have to use multiple damaging songs to deal with her, stuff like that. She doesn't take any damage from things that deal 1, so like Hiram, you could punch 2 of these into a Hiram, take 0 damage, and remove the Hiram. But her second ability, really what makes her sing, and that is level up. During your turn, whenever this character banishes another character in a challenge, gain 2 lore. Absolutely fantastic. And who doesn't love a Wreck-It Ralph character? Next up, jumping over to the 3-cost slot, we are on 4 Madam Mim Fox, a 3-cost inkable character, 4/3 stat line, questing for 1. When you play it, you bounce one of your characters back to your hand. Great way to protect those Maleficents or remove the damage from those Smees. And she has Rush, so she is going to be punching in as soon as she comes into play. Great way to deal with a lot of those threats. This is your main answer to something like Daisy Duck. Madam Mim Fox, still an absolute staple in the meta. We've seen Madam Mim Snake fall out of favor a little bit. It was a card people were playing pretty heavily before, but Madam Mim Fox just stays going strong. Next up in the 3-drop slot, we are on 4 White Rose, a 3-cost inkable character, 3/3 stat line, questing for 1. Still weird to me that this is a character because it's a rose, so it seems a little weird that this is a character. But when you play this character, gain 1 lore, so it's not going to gain you that lore when it's leaving, like something like Merlin Goat is, but it is going to gain you that lore when it's coming into play. So a great way to close out those games in those lockdown matchups where your opponent's just trying to remove all your characters. If you can gain lore passively by throwing something like this down, if you're at 17, 18, you could be closing out the game while they can't really do anything about it. You hit one of these and then a goat while you're at 17, it's like game over. Then we are on, this is directly from the Speci Moyen list, and that is 1 Pete. I think 1 Pete is fine. I think there's lots of times you may have Pete in your hand and he's not necessarily what you need. It does put you in a position where if you have Pete in your hand in the early game, you may not necessarily want to ink it. You want to save it till a little bit later, so you're looking at kind of inking around it while you try to save it, which can get a little awkward. I think Pete is potentially really good in certain instances. He's a 3/3 for 3, questing for 1, and when you play this character, opponents can't play actions until the start of your next turn. So it's a great way to throw this down, throw down like a Maleficent or something else, and go, okay, you can't remove these guys, so, you know, good luck. The only way they can really deal with it at that point would be something that challenges ready characters, but even something like Cinderella, you have to play a song to do that. You can't play a song when Pete's in play, so it is a great way to prevent your board from being interacted with for a turn and potentially closing out a game. Next up in the 3-drop slot is 2 Merlin Crab, a 3-cost inkable 3/3 character, questing for 1, and when you play this character and when he leaves play, you're going to be able to give another character Challenger 3, which is just going to make some of your characters extra beefy and deal with a lot of those major threats that could be potentially bearing down on you. Crab is not always necessarily what you want to see because he's not going to be gaining you a whole ton of lore, but when you need to get a threat out of your way or you want to deal with a Hiram with something like Calhoun, Merlin Crab can be really good on curve. You go like turn 1 Maleficent, Sapphire doesn't have much to do about that. Turn 2 Calhoun, and then maybe they ramp, and maybe they went first, maybe they ramp and they get that Hiram out. You're ready to go with Crab on 3 or Crab on 4 to deal with that Hiram. This is another change that I made to the Speci list, and that is going to be he was playing the Queen's Castle. I do still think the library is the better option. It is going to be potentially netting you less lore, but you look at something like Jim Hawkins, where if they ink once and then they shift the Jim Hawkins, he is a 7/5 attacker. He's still not dealing with the library, so if they want to deal with the library, they're looking at having to ink twice to be able to do that. So I think the library is going to be more likely to net you card draw. The other thing with the library is it can net you card draw as soon as it comes into play, because you can put characters in it like Turnabog's Followers or Broom and then proceed to do something that's going to cause them to be banished and gain that additional card draw, not only from those cards but from the library itself. So I think the library is not seeing enough respect in the Speci list. Personally, I do still think it is the better choice than Queen's Castle. Also, Steel Song has an incredibly hard time dealing with willpower of 8, so the library can stick out for a couple more turns. And like I said, the non-passive card draw I think can be a little more effective if you really need to draw some cards quick. This was my main character addition to this deck, something he wasn't playing, and that's going to be 3 Pluto Guard Dog, a 4-cost inkable character, 1/5 stat line, questing for 1. It does have bodyguard, which is fantastic to keep those characters protected, some of those smaller guys or guys you just maybe want to be able to get additional quests in with. And while this character has no damage, he gets +4 attack. So that first attack into it, he's going to be a 5/5. He's going to be wiping out pretty much anything that's challenging into it, and then maybe they may be able to remove it with minimal damage to them after that. But that first attack is going to be super beneficial for you, and like I said, he's just going to protect your field really well potentially. I think Pluto is really good. We saw Lawrence, who has a similar ability, be really good in prior sets, so I think Pluto has a lot of potential. Next up in the 4-cost slot, we are on 3 Genie Wish Fulfilled. This is where we reduced from 17 to 16. He was playing 4 Genie Wish Fulfilled. I am on 3 Genie Wish Fulfilled. I think he's really good. I think maybe with the library focus and the better, more consistent card draw that offers you over Queen's Castle, a 4th Genie is not necessary. You do also have Rush Elsa, so you've got multiple ways to potentially deal with those Diablos on top of the fire cannon, so I don't think he's super necessary for that. However, I do think in this deck list, particularly where you are trying to focus on questing, he is better than Merlin Rabbit in that he is a 2/4 stat line, so same as Rabbit, but he's questing for 2 and he's evasive. So he's going to be really hard for your opponent to potentially out. They may not have a lot of evasive threats that are going to be able to deal 4 damage, at least not in one go. And when you play this character, you're going to draw a card. So he's not drawing you a card on the way out like Rabbit, just on the way in. But I think that evasive and extra lore pip more than makes up for that. The last card in the 4-drop slot is going to be 4 Merlin Goats. You may have seen this coming. Goat is still the Goat. It's still a great way to gain lore and close out games. It's a 4-cost inkable character, 4/3 stat line, questing for 1, gaining you a lore when it comes in, gaining you a lore when it leaves. You can potentially do something like Goat Fox to gain 2 lore right away and end the game before your opponent can quest, if you're not in a position where they're going to have to challenge it to keep it from winning you the game. But if you're at 17 or 18, Goat is just a fantastic way to close out the game. Even if you're at less, he can be the passive lore can be really oppressive to your opponent. Then this was another count change from the original deck. He was playing 4 Gantu. This was part of where I cut some cards. I cut down to 2 Gantu instead of 4. Like I did mention, he is a captain, so he is going to trigger Smee and prevent him from taking damage at the end of the turn. But I think you're going to out Gantu really quickly. He's the kind of card that's going to come out and maybe get you 1 quest if you're lucky. If you're playing in Steel Song, they could probably deal with that 3 defense pretty easily. But playing into something like Ruby, they're going to have a much harder time dealing with the 4 attack. If you're playing against Sapphire Ruby, you could potentially see something where your opponent's ice blocking you and then killing him with Madame Medusa, which would definitely stink. They're the main concerns for lockdown with cards like this, and a big reason that I cut from 4 to 2. I think having Pluto in there is potentially, even though he quests for a lot less, is potentially a lot better. I feel like Gantu is kind of a win more card in some instances. Like, by the time you're getting him down on turn 5, you may already be at 16 or 18 lore. Questing for 4 at 16 is great, but if you're at 18, you don't need those extra lore pips. Then the last card in the deck, and another one I mentioned as a potential option to deal with those Diablos, is going to be Elsa the Fifth Spirit, a 5-cost inkable character, 2/5 stat line, questing for 1, coming down with Rush, which is fantastic, and evasive to deal with those Diablos. And when you play this character, exert chosen opposing character, so bonus points if your opponent has not been able to take advantage of the Diablo yet, and you're coming down exerting it with this and banishing it outright before they can do anything with it. That is always an amazing feeling. But Elsa the Fifth Spirit, not necessarily an aggro card in that she's only questing for 1, but a great way to deal with those board threats in the subsequent turns if your opponent can't remove her because she has 5 defense and is evasive. She's also a great combination with Crab to deal with many threats in the game. So that is the Amethyst Steel list. What do you guys think of it? Do you think it's a good list? Do you think my changes made it better or worse? Is there anything you would play differently? Are you running Amethyst Steel now? Does your deck list look the same? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe. And when you see those toys, video games, and decks featuring little birds like Diablo off in the distance, remember, it is not a mirage. You guys have a great day.